All right, let's talk about one of Go's most powerful and, let's be honest, most misunderstood features, reflection. It's kind of like this hidden engine that powers so many of the tools you and I use every single day, from JSON marshalling to our favorite web frameworks. So how about we pop the hood and really see how this thing works?
So picture this. You've got a task. You have to write a function that can handle any data structure. And I mean any, not just the ones you know about right now, but any struct that a user of your library might dream up tomorrow. You are stuck. How do you even begin to solve a problem like that?
Well, your first instinct is probably a type switch, right? But you're going to hit a wall, and you're going to hit it fast. You can add cases for int, for string, for float, but there are literally an infinite number of possible types out there. You could be adding cases all day, every day, and you would never, ever be finished. This path, it's a total dead end.
So this brings us right to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? In a language that's all about static types, like Go, how on earth do you write a piece of code that can work with types that you don't even know exist yet?
And the answer is reflection. That's it. It's the magic trick Go gives us to let our code look at, poke around in, and even change values and their types while the program is actually running. This is how we solve the impossible problem.
Now, to really get your head around reflection, you just need to understand two core types from the reflect package. Think of them as two completely different lenses you can use to look at the very same variable.
Okay, this is the analogy. If you get this, you're halfway there. Reflect.Type is the blueprint for a house. It tells you everything about the structure, the names of the fields, their types, any struct tags. It's all there in the plan. But reflect.Value, that is the actual house. It's where the furniture is. It holds the real live data. You see the difference? You can't live in a blueprint, but you can definitely walk through the house and rearrange the furniture. Getting this distinction is absolutely key.
So reflect.Type is all about the metadata. It's the what. You call reflect.Type on a variable, and you get back this object that tells you everything about its underlying type. What are its fields called? What are their types? It's all there.
And then you have reflect.Value. This is the actual thing. It's the container that holds the data itself. When you call reflect.Value, you're getting an object that wraps the runtime value. This is how you'd actually read that string or get that integer out of a field.
Now here is where it gets really, really clever. While there are infinite possible types, there are only a small, finite number of kinds. And that's the insight that makes all of reflection work. A kind is like a zoning category. You don't need a special rule for every single house blueprint. You just need to know if it's a struct, which is like a residential building, or a slice, which might be like an apartment complex. This lets us handle an infinite universe of types with just one simple switch statement.
Okay, so theory is great, but how do we actually put this to work? Let's walk through the pattern for inspecting any data structure, no matter how ridiculously complex it is. This is like getting X-ray vision for your code.
This is the universal pattern. Seriously, once you learn this, you'll see it everywhere. First, you get the reflect value. Next, you switch on its kind. Then, based on that kind, you use a special method, like .field for structs or .index for slices, to get the parts inside. And then, you just do it again. You recurse. This exact pattern is the beating heart of tools like fmt-printf and json.Marshal.
So far, we've only been looking at data, reading it. But what about changing it? Okay, this brings us to the single most common, most panic-inducing mistake that developers make with reflection. We need to talk about addressability.
Here is the best way I know to think about this. When you call reflect.ValueOf, Go gives you a copy. Think of it like a photograph. You can look at the photograph all you want, but if you draw a mustache on it, it doesn't change the real person, right? To actually modify the original variable, you need its address in memory. You need its mailbox. And the way you get that is by passing a pointer, and then calling .elem to get the thing the pointer, points to. That's the mailbox. That's the original.
And let me be perfectly clear. This is not a gentle suggestion. If you try to call set on a value that isn't addressable, if you try to write on that photograph, your program will panic. It will just explode. And this isn't a compile time error your editor will catch. This is a runtime bomb.
So, how do you stay safe? It's simple. Before you ever try to modify a value with reflection, you call one method, canSet. Think of it as your seatbelt. It checks two absolutely vital things for you. One, is this value addressable? Do I have the mailbox, not the photograph? And two, is the field I'm trying to change actually exported? It's your safety net.
Use it. Okay, enough of the scary stuff. Let's get to the really fun part. We're going to connect all this theory to a piece of practical magic you probably use every single day. And then we'll wrap up with some really important warnings about using this powerful tool.
Have you ever really wondered how struct tags work? Well, this is it. It's pure reflection. Think of your struct as a filing cabinet. The JSON package comes along, uses reflection to read that little JSON sticky note, and it knows exactly how to handle that field. Then your database library comes along and reads the DB sticky note. The struct itself doesn't care about the notes. They're just little pieces of metadata for other packages to find and use.
But look, all this power isn't free. Reflection is like a chainsaw. It's incredibly powerful, but it demands respect. It comes with 3 real costs. First, it's fragile. All those nice type errors the compiler usually catches for you, they turn into runtime panics. Second, readability takes a hit. You're trading clear static types for interface. And finally, the big one, performance. Reflective code can easily be 10 to 100 times slower than regular code. That is not a small number.
So when should you actually reach for this chainsaw? This little table is your guide. If you know all the types when you're writing the code, use static code. If this is a part of your application that needs to be screaming fast, definitely use static code. But if you're building a generic library that needs to work with types you've never seen before, well, that's what Reflection was made for.
At the end of the day, Reflection gives you the power to inspect and manipulate the very fabric of your programs as they run. It's the engine that drives so many of Go's most essential libraries. The only question left is, now that you know how the engine works, how are you going to use this power?